Since the dawn of synthesizers, polyphony has been one of the major struggles. Even today, one of the core features of a synthesizer is the number of notes it can play simultaneously. 5 notes are better than 4, 10 are better than 5, and so on. Or is it? Today we will debunk polyphony and we will show that we don't need 10 voices to create a solid harmonic structure. The key lies in Baroque music. Coming up. Monophony and polyphony are concepts developed in the Western world to describe the evolution of European music. Their name derives from the ancient Greek, meaning one sound and multiple sounds respectively. Medieval sacred and profane chants were monophonic, like the early Gregorian chants of the 9th and 10th centuries. The pieces consisted of a single melodic line sung without any accompaniment. Through the century, the musician eventually found out that you could play other notes together with the melody and that they sounded good. Originally, they were very simple intervals like octaves or perfect fifths moving in parallel with the melody, but soon they became more complex and independent. The simplest example of independent polyphony is with drone notes, where we have one single drone note held throughout the piece, regardless of what the melody is playing, like we can hear in bagpipes or hurdy-gurdies. And the fact that Western polyphony developed in choirs is the reason why we still call voices the number of notes that a synthesizer can play at the same time. In the Renaissance, the arrangement of both sacred and profane music became more and more complex, until by the Baroque era, a new style called counterpoint became popular. In counterpoint, many voices moved independently and their combination created chords. Later on, in the classical and romantic period, the melody became more and more independent from the accompaniment, which led to the common distinction between melody and chords. Compare, for example, this work by Bach with this one by Chopin. Both are keyboard works, but you can clearly see that in Chopin's one we have a melody in the upper staff and the chords in the lower one. In Bach's work, on the other hand, we have 3 independent melodies that move across both staves, and the chords are more scattered. When we play a polysynth, we usually play chords as in lash pads or trance stabs, so we treat them as a sort of pre-made musical block. However, according to the counterpoint style, a chord can also be thought of as a byproduct of many interwoven musical lines. In the first case, we start from the chord, and in the second case, we arrive at it. Many synthesizers were, and still are, monophonic, meaning that they can only play one note at a time. Therefore, to achieve a polysynth, we can say that one must clone the architecture of the monosynth as many times as the voice needed. Most modular systems are thus generally monophonic, because a modular polysynth would be quite cumbersome to create. It would require a lot of modules, a lot of space. There are, of course, many musical genres where one oscillator is more than enough, like drone or noise or the more experimental stuff. Generally speaking, however, if we want to play melodically, we are generally advised to get more voices to give the melody a proper harmonic foundation. However, there are many techniques that can help us fake more melodies with a single voice, and today we will focus on 3 of them: Arpeggios, compound melodies, and the Bariolage. Some of these techniques are already discussed by Caterina Barbieri in many interviews where she discusses her compositional approach for patterns of consciousness, and I will link to them in the description. So the easiest way to outline a harmony is through arpeggios, where we go through the chord tones one by one instead of slamming them together. This sequence is just a series of 4 arpeggios, so we can listen to the individual notes through the composition mode. If we add some reverb, we blur together the individual notes and we have an even stronger harmonic feeling. Now, this is just arpeggios, but you can incorporate arpeggios throughout a melody to underline certain melodic passages. Let's take, for example, this melody. We can hear that we have many long notes, and we can fill the gaps with some arpeggios to underline some harmonic elements of our song. For example, like this. As opposed to this. You can hear that the rhythmic footprint of the piece is the same, but we have a more solid and structured harmonic foundation. also played with the gate length to emphasize the melody notes with longer gates. Now we can even make every note of our melody, the first or the last one, of a very fast arpeggio in a sort of Baroque guitar kind of fashion, like this. We can hear that the accents are on these longer notes. And these are very fast arpeggios that land there. This is how they sound. So arpeggios outline the chords, but chords, as we saw, are not the only way to harmonize a piece. We can also use other lines that just imply the chords, as in the Baroque counterpoint. Of course, we can achieve a solid harmonic motion with just two instruments, but what if we have just one voice? So if we hear a Baroque piece for a solo instrument like flute or violin, we get the impression that there are more voices carrying on a counterpoint. This illusion is possible by implying more parts and making the solo instrument alternate between them. This technique is often called a compound melody because it is a combination of two separate melodies into one. We can hear some great examples in Bach's work. Here, for instance, we can listen to the melody in the upper part moving like this, and the bass part like this. If we played them together, they would sound like this. It is as if two melodies are offset by half their values and played in a fast alternation. Let us try to apply these techniques in the modular world. Also in this patch we're gonna use the USTA sequencer paired with the Brainso oscillator through its final output, because we will need the white section, the complex section, and we will see why in a minute. So the most important thing here is to be aware of the implied harmony that we want to outline. That is just music theory 101. So I wrote this melody as the upper line, and this melody as the lower one. Even if the melody are fairly simple, if we overdub them, we can appreciate their relative harmonic motion. You can see that both have the same length of 16 time units, and that their individual stage length is 2 time units. So what I did is I combined them into 16 stages of 1 time unit each, here over pattern 3. So stage 1 is the first note of the first melody, stage 2 is the first note of the second melody, stage 3 is the second note of the first melody, and so on. We can also start from the low melody instead of the high one, as I did in this pattern. We can also play with faster tempos. And with different gate durations. Now these sequences are pretty steady, but we can apply the same technique with syncopated melodies or with different rhythms in a sort of similar fashion to what we did with gates. For example, first of all we can start by adding some swing to our current pattern and see how the rhythm affects the overall flavor. This sort of syncopation perhaps splits the two melodies even more and lets us better appreciate the high and the low one. Or we can blend more syncopated lines and favor rhythm over melody. It is a more percussive approach where we play with different registers of the brainso as if they were different sections of a drum kit. Here's how they sound individually. I'm using a combination of the set all and shift all mod buttons and the navigation encoder to transpose the pattern loop. And here's how they sound together. Now, since we are using the final output, we have many ways to change our timbre. Brainso's response to external CV is incredibly fast, so we can assign a different timbre to each of the three parts that we listened before by programming more CV lines. For example, the bass can have a more open wave folders, and the medium fillers can have a different source settings, and the high accent can be more subtle with different symmetry control. We can also have some ping accents here and there to add even more motion. So it is thus a false assumption that a 4-track sequencer is wasted in a single oscillator system. In many classical pieces for stringed instruments, sometimes we hear a technique that gives us the illusion not only of multiple voices, but also of multiple timbres playing out of a single instrument. It is called Bariolage, and it works by quickly alternating between an open string and a stopped one, which is with the finger pressed on it. Bariolage is a French word that means mixture of colors and refers to the variety of texture that the two different strings provide, because the open one has a more bright and resonant tone, while the stopped one is generally more mellow. Oftentimes, the open string is generally higher than the stopped one, providing a nice resonant droning sound. It is not that far from the use of the open G string in 5-string banjos. So let us try to see if we can transpose the concept of Bariolage to our modular synthesizer. We are not limited to 4 strings with a modular synthesizer, so we can make any note sounds like played on an open string. For example, I can insert a high B between every note of this melody in E major. Now, to add some spice to this whole talk, I tuned my oscillator to a Baroque A, which is 415 Hz instead of 440. So I pre-wrote my Bs, and then I can set all my stages to the same length. Then I can give it a little bit more of an attack to mimic the bow effect. I can play with the timbre. For the Bariolage effect, I will recall a different timbre setting through the CVB channel. As you can see, over every B, I have a higher CVB value, which I will patch, for example, to my, I don't know, we can start from the symmetry parameter. We can also program a separate track with different CV settings on the same tempo and use them to change our first note, which is the closed string, for example. It works very well with both fast and slow tempos. We can appreciate the different texture when we play the same note but with two different timbre settings, which is like the Bariolage that we can hear in Haydn's The Frog Quartet. And since we are working with a modular synthesizer, we can go beyond the physical features of a bowed instrument, so we can use as many CV tracks as we want to add other patterns to modulate our timbre. So I'm going to set my CVA of track 2 to raw voltages as well, and I'm gonna use them to modulate my wave folder. So we are now adding a sort of rhythm within a rhythm, which gives us even more rhythmic structure within our harmonic motion. And if we add some reverb, and we can even play with some swing as well. Remember to set the same swing for all the tracks. And finally, we can drop some notes to a lower register like we did before. And perhaps even to a high one. Try to see with a faster tempo. And now we clearly have the illusion of multiple voices playing at the same time. So with these three techniques borrowed from the classical music, we saw that a monophonic synthesizer with an oscillator like the Bariolage and a sequencer like the USTA is not necessarily limited. This is it for today. I hope you found this video useful, and I will see you next time.